Okay, like everything else, this is an introduction. That's why I call it Nutrition 101. Those of you that have been in school know that that's real basic. You probably should know that before you even got here. But let me just take a quick survey. I know this is a biased class because most of you know these things already. Okay, if you think the statement is true, just raise your hand. Fat is bad for you. Fat. Fat in your diet is bad.
Fat on
Gives
your
you
body
heart
may
disease.
Yeah, fat on your body may be bad.
That's not what I said. Okay, good. You need to drink 2 quarts of water every day.
What was that?
2 quarts of water every day.
Yes and no.
Raise your hand if you can raise your hand. It's not
Yes.
graded, and he's not filming you, so you're not going to be held accountable. Okay.
2 is better than none.
Pardon?
2 is better than none.
Yeah. Well, that's not what the question was. Just stick to what the question is.
True.
Okay. Don't modify the question. Okay. Okay. So we'll do that again. 2 quarts of water. You need to drink at least 2 quarts of water a day. Okay. Okay. Exercise will keep you healthy. You don't. It's not. Exercise is the most important thing. Okay. Following the food pyramid is a good way to eat.
The government food.
Good. Yeah. Who else makes a food pyramid?
If you turn it upside down, it works.
No, that's not what okay.
That's not the question.
Drinking milk will prevent osteoporosis. Okay. The milk you get at Safeway. Okay. You need fresh fruits and vegetables all year round to stay healthy.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. Crooked teeth are hereditary.
What is it?
Crooked teeth. You have, it's just because of the genes. There's nothing you can do about it. Okay? Wrong. Okay. Salt is bad for you. Oh, good. That's not bad. You can all go home.
Did the one we agree on, was that correct? Because every other
What
one.
do you agree on?
Huh?
There's no general. Most we got maybe 40% of the people.
Well, the question you had about it's important to have vegetables in your diet. That's the one.
Is that what I said?
No.
Is that what I said? I don't think so.
We hear different.
Okay, I'll read it again. I wrote it down so you.
Oh, okay.
Fresh fruits and vegetables are necessary all year long.
Yeah.
Well, I said yes.
Oh,
Okay, what if you're an Eskimo?
You can't get them fresh
Okay.
over there.
So I got one wrong.
I didn't think about that.
So Eskimos are not
So
healthy,
none of
right?
the statements were true.
Okay.
Okay, so I got that one wrong.
Well, most of those are myths, and they're pushed by. We won't try and analyze their motives, but most of the stuff you hear about your diet is incorrect. It's put out to sell food. Okay, this gets real. There's 3 basic types of food. Can you name those? Okay, name them.
Carbohydrates, proteins, fats.
Great. See, everything is made of those. Those are the things that we need in various proportions. But very interesting. You know, most of you knew the response. The correct response to is fat good or bad for you? And it's very interesting. The amount of money spent on health care, the chronic disease incidents, and all these things, much higher now than they were 75, 80, 100 years ago. And percent of the calories obtained from fat now is much, much lower than it used to be. Turn of the last century, something like 65% of the calories consumed were fat. Now, what they tell you now, I don't know, what do they say? Not more than 10% of your diet should be fat? That's wrong. Fats are, why do you think one reason fats are so important? If you've been following along, even loosely, you'll recognize that the cell basically looks like this. It's real, and not proportionate, but this is what we call the cell membrane, and that's where all the action the major act, nothing can happen in here unless first the cell membrane functions properly. And it isn't a matter of, say, for example, a B vitamin comes up here in the serum and just wanders in. It's an active transport mechanism. And for that to work, the cell membrane has to function properly. It's like the old Star Wars. Remember the first Star Wars movie? Maybe some of you weren't born then, 1977, something like that. I remember because we had a son born in 77, and everybody thought we named him after Luke, what's his, Skywalker. We didn't, because we hadn't seen, I guess we did see the movie when she was in labor, but anyway, you'll notice there, in the movie, it's very educational scientifically, because here's the little ship out here, and here's the big mother, whatever you call it, and they'd communicate back and forth. And if the communication was, positive, then this big ship would open up a little port. A little port would appear here, and the ship would come in here, and it would get moved across this membrane and into the interior. And that's what stuff does when we get it into our cells. See, insulin is a little thing that moves sugar across here, and every thing that and that's why this whole thing is fat. It's all these fat molecules. Unless you have good fat in your diet, your cell membranes don't work right. And this whole idea that we're going to use trans fats, because saturated fat's bad for you, is a great contributor to chronic disease. It's one of the big things that increase the risk of all these chronic diseases. So anyway, we'll be talking about it. Now, when we talk about fats, it's really important that we define what we're talking about. And if you want healthy fat, you have to have a healthy animal. And most animals we eat these days are not healthy. They're raised in feedlots, and in many cases they recycle the manure because there's a high concentration of protein and nutrients left in the manure. And so they recycle it, they put it in feedlots, and they grain it so it'll gain weight. There's all sorts of practices that are using antibiotics and hormones and all these things. And so most of the fat you get is not good unless you get a pastured animal. Yes.
There seems to be more, bit more of a laser light coming in on pasture raised, which you didn't see 5 years ago. I know at the rodeo I do trade show, the lady next door that does the coffee wagon, because she makes $10,000 in one weekend. Her and her husband got 700 cattle, and they went all pasture raised.
Well, that's good. Well, sure, because they see, why does Safeway have over 100 organic products now? Because they make money, and there's people are getting educated, and so there's more of a demand. That's right. So there is more and more, but the vast majority of people eat feedlot animals. And for just one of the side effects of a feedlot animal is that E. coli, you've probably heard about the E. coli outbreaks where a whole lot of people get sick and they actually die. Well, the E. coli count in the intestinal tract of feedlot animals is many times higher than it is in a pastured animal. And so the risk of getting an E. coli infection, and we won't go into all the other aspects of it, the risk of getting an E. coli infection is much, much greater if you eat an animal whose E. coli count is much higher. So you can have a much greater exposure. But look at this list here of the other things that healthy fats, fat from pastured animals, wild animals, raises a good HDL. Trans fats lower, so you want to look on the label. Most people now are labeling their food no trans fatty acids. And so if you just read the label, okay, it conserves the good omega-3 fatty acids. It promotes insulin binding. Now, insulin has to, if we have an insulin molecule here, and it's trying to move a sugar molecule into the cell, you have to have ability to bind these two at the cell membrane site. Saturated fats increase insulin binding, so you might say it increases insulin sensitivity. So you don't need as much insulin to keep your blood sugar under control. Okay, they don't interfere with enzyme functions. They help coconut oil, totally saturated fat, kills bacteria and viruses and fungi.
So does raw honey, doesn't it?
Well, we aren't talking about raw honey right now. Okay, it's a preferred source of energy for our hearts. It's important for keep your bones strong. You know, we talk about osteoporosis. You know, we take people off fat consumption goes down, osteoporosis goes up. And maybe one of the factors is the fact that people are avoiding fat. You know, you go to the grocery store now, and you want to get some sour cream or something like that. They have fat-free sour cream, fat-free milk, fat-free cheese. It's amazing. It's how wonderful.
And the kefir, there's only one store in Salem I know of has got whole
Great.
fat.
Okay, that's good to know. But the point we're trying to make is that it's you have to look carefully if you want to find full-fat dairy products.
Hard to find.
Okay. And they carry the fat-soluble vitamins. You know, we have an epidemic of vitamin D deficiency that's getting a little bit better now because there's more and more awareness of it. But you wonder why. Why is there an epidemic of vitamin D deficiency? Because the doctors tell us we shouldn't eat fat. And many doctors still do that. You have heart disease. Many doctors are still telling their patients low-fat diets.
And no salt.
And stay out of the sunlight. You know, no one skin cancer will get colon cancer, but you won't get skin cancer, okay? Okay. Well, okay. Unsaturated fats, it's a difference between the way the fat's put together, and some unsaturated fats are fine. If you eat vegetables and nuts, you're going to get some unsaturated fats. And in the right proportion, they're fine, they're good, they're nutrients. But this idea that we have to use safflower, sesame oil and walnut oil and peanut oil and corn oil. Those are bad for you. And one of the real problems is, especially when you cook with them, is an unsaturated fat is when you have two electrical bonds between the molecules. And that's unstable. And so when you heat it, it breaks and it becomes rancid. It becomes oxidized. And we have an oxygen come in here, and rancid oxygen, it's really a free radical promoter, and free radical causes disease, breaks down cell membranes and cell structures. Fat-soluble nutrients, there's a whole list of them, and almost every day you can pick up a magazine, and you'll see the importance of lutein and lycopene and all these other things that we don't have enough of. Okay, proteins. Proteins are basically amino acids. And amino acids are necessary for repair and also for building things in your body. Repairing the tissue, building enzymes, building antibodies. These are proteins that we need. And there are certain amino acids that are called essential amino acids, and there are amino acids that are called non-essential, which basically means your body can make them. And the idea is that we need this complete set of essential amino acids if we want to be healthy. And there's certain types of protein that have, and almost always it's an animal protein that has the complete amino acid combination. And that's why one of the best foods available are eggs, if you eat the yolk. Of course, we've been told for years, it's changing though. It's gradually, the pendulum's swinging back, and we're learning that egg yolks are fine.
But even at the natural food stores, in the organic section, there's egg whites in a carton separated from the yolks.
Sure, because it's hard to change something, because their doctor told them some time ago that they shouldn't eat egg yolks. And anyway, but almost every store now carries free-range, uncaged, organic
Pasture-raised.
eggs.
Yep.
And they aren't really too much more expensive.
Pasture-raised were $7 a dozen.
Oh,
Why?
You can go to Safeway and get them $5 or $6.
Well, this is pasture raised, this isn't
These are
cage-free.
pasture, okay. Yeah, but it doesn't matter where you get them or how much you pay for them. The important thing is you need to know what you're getting, and you need to know that eggs are a good food. But eggs, some of you have chickens.
There you go.
Well, I've got a few chickens, and eggs are kind of a seasonal food because this time of year the chickens aren't laying much. You can find a few eggs out there if you really hunt. Well, mine are free range, so you have to hunt for the eggs, but they don't lay nearly as much this time of year. And so to get eggs into the market, what do you think they do?
They put them in lighted barns
Yeah,
and keep the
they
lights on
change their
24
natural
hours.
environment to trick the chicken. Have you ever picked chickens? You ever picked? That's a real fun thing. but usually before you pick picking chicken means you put them into cages, you can ship them to market. But usually, for 24 hours before you go in to pick the chickens, and so you don't spend all your time chasing them, they leave the lights on for 24 hours. And somehow, something that does to the chicken brain, the chicken will just sit there then. And so you can go over and pick up 4 chickens at a time and put them in a cage. Ever hypnotize a chicken? You take a chicken and hold it and put its head right down so this beak is right above the crack in a sidewalk. You can let it go and the chicken will just stay there. They're very interesting animals. Okay, so we want to get protein, but this isn't part of this class necessarily, but what's the next step if you get good protein in your diet?
Make sure
You
eat
got to
fats.
digest it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what we're talking about next week is digestion and elimination. But if you don't digest your food, and it's a vicious cycle because to make the enzymes you need and hydrochloric acid, all those things in your gut, you need protein. And so if you're on a protein low diet or protein deficient diet, you may not be able to digest your food thoroughly. And so for most of us in our generation, we need to take something to help us digest our food. And carbohydrates, that's a huge part of everybody's diet is carbohydrates. It's probably the most addicting food out there. And one of the reasons it's addicting is because many grains are converted into opiate-like chemicals in your gut. In other words, they're addicted, morphine-like substances in your intestinal tract if they aren't digested thoroughly. And some grains, some of us lack the ability to digest completely. And one of the reasons for it, we've genetically modified these plants, we've hybridized them and to increase the crop. And so wheat, for example, is not really the same grain it used to be. It's been manipulated so much. They took some people that were extremely gluten sensitive, and what they did, they found some grain that was grown 100, 200 years ago, and they found you could feed gluten sensitive people this gluten, and they didn't have the reaction.
Isn't that called heirloom grain?
That's one. Well, that's not really. Heirloom grains heirloom is something that has not been hybridized. So the seeds you get from the crop can be replanted and you get the same plant. But this just ancient grains, and they're things that you don't hear about. All you eating quinoa and amaranth and things
They're
like
coming
that.
back.
They're coming back because of so many people that are gluten sensitive, and these grains don't have the gluten in them. So I really think that so many people have gotten sensitized to gluten and are reacting to it. Somewhere I may have the book. There's a book out called Dangerous Grains, and you read it lists, and this isn't an exclusive list. They list over 140 different diseases that are directly related to grain sensitivity. So my advice for most people, if you have any sort of a chronic condition, eliminate gluten for a while, eliminate grain for a while. Give it a month or so and see what happens to your disease. Most people get better, but it's hard. Okay, carbohydrates are important. They're energy foods. They're basically long chains of carbon, and that are broken down into a sugar that the body uses for fuel to run the cells. And I guess, I don't know if we want to call this a food group, but fiber is another critical part of our diet. It's mainly found in carbohydrates, and one of the purposes of fiber is to add bulk to the contents of your intestine, so your intestinal tract has something to pump on. Because your food gets pumped through the intestinal tract, and if there's no fiber, no bulk, you're much more likely to get constipated and all the complications that come from that. But the other critical function of fiber, I feel, is that it slows down. See, when you eat a complex carbohydrate, it's like, well, you might have a carbon chain here, several hundred carbons long. Now, sugar is a 6-carbon molecule, and that's what your body uses for energy. And this is what is absorbed into the cell if you have enough insulin. Well, your blood sugar, after you eat a meal, your blood sugar will go up and then it'll come down, and then you get hungry again, and like this. Now, when you eat simple carbohydrates, your blood sugar changes quickly, and then it drops quickly. And this is this is stressful. And when your blood sugar goes up quickly or falls quickly, your adrenal glands secrete cortisol. Cortisol is an aging hormone. It has lots of good functions, but when we see dramatic shifts in the cortisol level, high levels of cortisol kill brain cells, for one thing. And so this is a stress reaction. So if you're eating complex carbohydrate, that rise and fall is modified, and it's much less stressful. And this is when people that say they're 2 hours after, 3 hours after eating, they just go crazy. They've got to go have a coffee break. They've got to have a candy bar. They've got to have something sweet to eat. It's because their blood sugar is falling rapidly. It's not necessarily because it's too low. It's just that it's changing rapidly, and this can make some people feel quite miserable. So the trick is to eat complex carbohydrates for your blood, and that's one of the reasons. I think juicing's fine in moderation. I don't think it's good to have it a major part, unless you get a juicer like a Vitamix or something like that, and where it's the whole food. It doesn't, in the old days you get a juicer and then you end up with a big pot full of fiber. And you can use it to bake things in, but when you're drinking that juice, your blood chemistry changes quickly. If you drink carrot juice, you know it's very, very sweet. And that's because it's basically you're getting sugars. So carbohydrates are great, all the vitamins and things, and the trace minerals and things like that. They're a major part of carbohydrates. But it's important to keep in mind that you don't get many fat-soluble vitamins in carbohydrates. Most of the fat-soluble vitamins come from animal protein, animal products. I recently learned that mushrooms are a good source of vitamin D, the D3, not the D2 that you may get some other vegetables. Okay, any questions about any of that? So you understand the food groups, the purpose of each of the different foods, and we talk about what the function of, besides the things we talk about, what's the purpose of eating fat? Besides the things listed here on your papers.
Satisfies you.
Pardon?
It satisfies you.
Yeah. On a day like today, what sounds good? A fresh fruit salad or a pot of bacon and bean soup? Yeah. With lots of bacon in it. Doesn't that sound much more satisfying? Yeah, well, they're cold weather. The fat is, the other thing about carbohydrates, your body, it moves through your intestinal tract very quickly. So you can have a big fruit salad, and an hour later you're going to be hungry. But if you have a big, high-fat meal, it's digested and absorbed much more slowly, and so the sense of satisfaction, more a lasting effect of a meal, add more fat. At the turn of the century, they used to have all these cream sauces and gravies and just lots of fat. Okay, cooking. Yeah, cooking oils. It's really, I think, important to stick with coconut oil, olive oil, lard. If you raise your own animal, save the lard. Lewis and Clark. One of the reasons they were able to survive during the winter up at Fort Clatsop was they ate their candles. What were the candles made out of in those days?
Lard.
Lard.
Oh, of all things.
Yeah. So, I don't know, I've never tried, I don't know, what's the lard candle smell like? Probably doesn't have that nice cinnamon fragrance, but it's, you can eat it, and don't try and eat your wax candles. That would not be good for you.
Do you have a lot of trouble finding free range for the lard? You mean to find
We're-
some in a grocery store? Can you
Yeah, you-
differentiate?
No, you probably, it's hard to find lard in a grocery store.
Could
I-
be.
We're,
You can just
we're
buy
fortunate-
bacon.
I
Pardon?
see it.
You can buy it in a box like cheese.
Well, what
Yeah,
about
you
bacon
can, but I don't know
then?
where that came
I mean,
from.
do they do free range bacon and that
I
kind
don't
of
know,
stuff?
I'm not likely.
Yeah.
You probably have to go to
That's-
one of the
I
custom
wonder
meat
about that,
places.
yeah.
And since a lot of people in this area hunt or raise their own cattle, there are meat processing companies that you can go down. I know you over here on where Prairie Road and anyways on the outskirts of Eugene, 4-Star Meat or something. You can go in there and you can buy lard. But
Where
most-
they
the name
can
of the
verify
company?
the source that way.
yeah, well, most people bring their animals in. A lot of people will raise their animals in a pasture, and then right before they butcher it, they'll grain it a little bit.
Yeah. There's a co-op up in Dallas that
Yeah,
does the same
well,
kind of
you
thing.
shop around and just go ahead and talk to the people. If you trust them, then you know, they're gonna, because a lot of people still believe that you should have low fat,
Yeah.
and so you can get lard reasonably inexpensive.
I
What
buy
was the
lamb
name of
and
the
beef,
company?
or lamb and,
Yeah, well,
goat.
what, you say shop around, but we've got a lot of sources here. You might try, you know, can't think of the name, but the market in town. that-
Well, there's several mobile meat processing guys too.
Yeah, but they take their meat someplace
Yeah.
and wrap it and package it, that's right.
But they come and kill it at the.
Yeah, okay. But shop around. We're blessed here. We got lots of access here to things in larger cities you wouldn't have access to. Okay, sweeteners. You know, you can read about aspartame and Splenda and sucralose and all these things. You know, if you're gonna eat sugar, eat sugar. My feeling is maple syrup. An interesting study I saw. They looked at all these quote natural sugars, agave juice and honey and maple syrup and some of the other quote natural sweeteners. The two that were best for you, one was date sugar, and basically it's best for it because basically date sugar is just ground up dates. There's no extraction process. But almost all the others, they change your blood sugar quickly. And so no matter what you're thinking about, you need to get used to eating less sugar. Sugar is a stress food. It ages us. Yeah,
Isn't brown sugar a little better than white sugar?
a little better, because they just call it dirty white sugar.
Okay.
You know, if you remember, so what would really be, you know how they process sugar? They get the cane or the beet or whatever they're going to use, and what do? They grind it up and boil it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, what's left over? What's that stuff called that left over at the bottom of the vat? Molasses. So molasses and date sugar are nutritionally, because that's where a lot of the minerals ended up with the sugar processing. Brown sugar and turbinado sugar and all these other sugars are basically highly processed food.
What about maple syrup? It's just boiled down.
Yeah, but it's not, nutrition-wise, it's not real high on the list.
Okay.
Stevia is also another good. It actually increases your insulin sensitivity. And so it's a good substitute, but almost every one of the other ones is bad. And if you read these quotes, like aspartame, taking my diabetics off aspartame led to an immediate improvement in their disease. Try and talk to a diabetic, try and talk them out of their Diet Pepsi. It's almost impossible. They're very addicted to it. But if you read these quotes, it can participate diabetes, stimulates and aggravates diabetic retinopathy, that's where you go blind, neuropathy, where you get peripheral nerve problems, and it destroys the optic nerve. You know, so you can debate, and there'll be a new sugar out here one of these days. There's always is, because things like aspartame get a bad name, but you know, it's in almost every diet pop. Almost everyone. They get clearance from the FDA and they're going to push it because it's cheap and it makes things taste sweet. So just try and minimize your sugar intake. You know? Treat it like any other drug. Okay, so once we learn to get good food in our body, let's move ahead a page. We're gonna have, let's go ahead a couple pages. Go ahead to this, where we have this little graph that talks about which foods are we eating. Now, what these foods are based, these lists are based on what we call the nutrient concentration of the particular food. So if you look at the nutrient concentration, broccoli's number one, spinach, Brussels sprouts, lima beans, peas, asparagus, artichokes, etc. Sweet potatoes lower than I thought it would be, but the things we eat the most of it is on the other column, and you can see like tomatoes are number one crop, dietary choice, and it ranks number one, but as far as its nutrient content, it's down at 16. So this is something I want to try and memorize. Just keep this in mind and try and maybe increase your intake of the foods that are higher in nutrient. Broccoli sprouts. If you learn to sprout broccoli, it's just a superfood. But look, keep that in mind as you look at your own diet and look at your pantry and look at the things you onions surprises me. They're clear down here at number 31. I thought was really interesting. Onions and garlic. As your dietary intake of onions and garlic goes up, your risk of contracting a viral disease goes down. And there's lots of therapeutic benefits from eating things like garlic. And on the next page, I just think this is a fascinating picture. The one that's here. What do you think I'm trying to convey? What idea do you think I'm trying to convey when I put something like this in the handout? What this is are pictures of stomachs, the shape, autopsies. These are different stomachs from different people, obviously. What do you think? What's the idea I'm trying to convey? And then the picture, and just to the left on that half of the page, shows that the shape of liver, that top left-hand one, shows various levels that the liver sticks down below the rib cage in a normal person. What do you think the idea is?
I guess that some of these pictures seem to be much more enlarged than other pictures.
Well, that's true. If you eat a lot, when I joined the Navy, first time in my life, you could eat all you want. And you could go back and you could just eat, and I gained about 25 pounds in boot camp. Because you just eat until you didn't want to eat anymore. But then you find that it takes more to fill you up because your stomach will actually stretch. And it takes more to give you the sensation of fullness. And so when people eat less, their stomach shrinks. That's the whole idea behind stomach stapling and all this other stuff, to make you feel full sooner. No, the point, this came out of a book by Dr. Roger Williams, and we're all different. And the nutrient requirements of everybody is somewhat different. We all need carbohydrates, fat, and protein. We all need vitamin D and C, but we all need it in different quantities. So what works for your husband or your wife or your children may not work for you. So just keep that in mind as we learn all these different things. And the other side of that page is now, when they process wheat, for example, when they make white flour out of whole wheat, they actually remove about 85% of the magnesium. And all the other important trace minerals, it's pretty much the same. They remove these things because it prolongs the shelf life of the product. So it's purely mercenary motive. But if you look at this kind of gray thing on the left side of that page with the stomachs and liver, you see all the places where minerals and vitamins fit in if we want to convert glycogen, which is the storage form of sugar, into glucose. And so you think it takes phosphorus and magnesium and nicotinic acids, vitamin B3, magnesium in 2 or 3 different areas, thiamine, vitamin B1, and all these things. That's why whole foods are so important, because they have, I truly believe God made a food the way he did, because in that particular food, we need the whole food, you get the nutrients you need to process it. That just makes sense. That's why people that live in the Arctic can survive eating the way they do, and why the people that live in the tropical area can survive eating the way they do. What's the common denominator between the people in Alaska and the people in Guatemala?
No stores.
No.
Eating locally.
Okay. That's one. Most places, not anymore. What's the other common denominator about the food, please?
They're eating local, fresh food.
Right. And what's one more thing about local and fresh and
Unprocessed.
unprocessed? We're missing something.
Omega-3 fatty acids. Fish.
Pardon?
Omega-3 fatty
Well,
acids.
that's
fish.
unprocessed, yeah. It's seasonal.
Mm-hmm.
See? I bet if you look, most of us, if we look at what we eat for breakfast in July, it's not much different than what we eat for breakfast in January. Because we're modernized, you know, we're scientific, we're advanced civilization, so we can ship bananas for all over the world and they stay fresh. But they're whole foods. And so why don't we turn to this page called, what I call the Dietary Guidelines. Now, a wholesome diet, in my opinion, now you're going to get a lot of controversy. Dr. Oz may not agree with everything I say, but my sponsors don't care what I say. Okay. So the ideal diet is, just like we mentioned a minute ago, it's whole foods, or unprocessed foods. What would be the other 2 components of that triad?
Seasonal.
Seasonal,
Local.
the other thing is moderation. I just want to throw that in. Okay, seasonal foods, unprocessed, and in moderation.
I just got back from a couple of weeks in Alaska, and believe me, up there it's very hard to get good food because you have to buy everything in the grocery store, and it comes, you know, like Safeway has an organic section, but most people can't afford to buy
That's
the
right.
more expensive part. So
Well, that's because you didn't want to eat the walrus.
right. Sarah Palin, I think, lives on deer meat and salmon.
Well, maybe. I might question that, but anyway, that's right. We went to Hawaii 20, 30 years ago, and one of my biggest disappointments was you go to a restaurant and the food's just like it was on the mainland. So we started quit eating at the restaurants. We'd walk down the street to a local farmer's market. You get 10 papaya for $1. There's nothing better, I think, and for breakfast in Hawaii, you have fresh papaya and fresh bananas and fresh pineapple with lemon and lime juice on it. That is so good. Anyway,
Where do you get your protein, though? That's
I
got
like
a lot of
breakfast.
protein.
I ate fish in the
Oh,
afternoon.
okay.
Well, Okay, animal protein. Protein is important, but it probably shouldn't comprise more than about 10 or 15% of your diet. Okay. Now, it needs to be whole protein. I mean, it needs to be organic, local protein. Ideally, we would raise our own animals, like I said earlier. And the other thing, the reason the Eskimo can survive, the reason the Indians did well on buffalo, and the Eskimos on seals and walruses, and the Indians up along the Columbia River did well on salmon as a major staple in their diet. They didn't have fresh fruits and vegetables. What do you think they ate? Where did they get their vitamins and minerals? Well, they ate the whole food. And the Indians, what did an Indian throw away after he killed a buffalo? Nothing. They ate the whole animal. They ate the brain. They ate the eyeballs. They ate the Indians along the Clatsop. If you ever get a chance, go to that Fort Clatsop and go to their interpretive center and sit down and watch the videos of the Indian diet. The salmon, I'd love to have seen a salmon run on the Columbia River 200 years ago. They've flooded Salido Falls, and you don't see where they get out. Anyway, they take the whole salmon, they cut off the head, and they throw the head into a pot, and they made fish head soup. And so they got all these fats and glandular stuff. And the Indian kids would pluck out the eyeballs of the salmon as a delicacy. How many of you have ever eaten a salmon eyeball?
Oh, yeah, I eat the fish eyeballs.
Well, how do they feel? How do they taste? How do they feel?
Yeah, it's just very fatty.
Yeah,
I try to eat the whole head, everything.
yeah.
Yeah.
On a spork, or do you cook it first?
No, it's cooked, but yeah, it's a little bit hard to get used to. But it's like, oh, this is good for me.
Yeah, well, that's what the Indians apparently did. They'd put all the fish head, they must have had hundreds of fish heads, and they cut off the heads and put it in and boil it, and they'd get all those juices and those herbs and enzymes and hormones, all the good stuff. But anyway, they ate the whole animal, and the Indians in the plains did the same thing. They ate the liver and the kidneys and the organs and the brain. They didn't throw it away, and that's why they were able to survive without fresh fruits and vegetables. They take the intestinal tract and the upper intestine, where the animal had eaten some grass and the fermentation process had started. They'd take that and cook it over a fire and eat it. So anyway, it's fascinating when you learn about this. But we do need protein. But I think as times get more difficult, I think if you can fence off 10 square feet in your backyard, put a chicken or two out there. They're easy to take care of. You can clip them so their wings so they don't fly over the fence, and you get eggs. And if you're brave enough to get a rooster, you get chicks, and you can butcher them.
Well,
Yes, Kurt?
Say you gotta have a rooster because you gotta wake up in the morning.
Well, you might. It's funny when people come to. We've got a rooster. I think our last one died recently. When people come and the rooster starts crowing at 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And we sleep through it. We don't even notice it. But people come to visit say, "Oh, that rooster." That's why they say.
Only in the summer, though. This time of year, they wouldn't.
They don't
come
make
awake
much
until
noise.
9.
But anyway, that's why you can't have a rooster in the city. Okay, grains are good food, but this new thing is called the Paleo Diets come along. And they say, well, this is the way the caveman used to eat, and that's supposed to be healthy. Well, come on. But it basically, you cut out the grains. Grains are a civilization that's settled in one spot, and they have time to raise grain. But we overdo it. They're addictive foods, and we overdo it, and we don't digest them, and there's a whole lot of problems with eating so much grain. And then the paleo diet, which pretty much eliminates grain, does so many things for so many chronic diseases. So that's why I say again, if you've got any sort of chronic disease, from diabetes to colitis to headaches to depression to anything, eliminate grains for a while and see how it makes you feel. But there's there's legumes and vegetables and all these other good things, and fruits. Fruits really should be seasonal. We shouldn't be eating, you go to Safeway, you can get any fruit you want. You can get pineapples, you can get grapes, you can get pears and peaches. Well, I guess there's no peaches in there now. But we don't need those all year long, especially in Oregon. And there's relatively simple carbohydrates. They aren't necessary for good health.
Dried fruit good for you.
Yeah, but you don't eat it in the same quantity. Sure, you can eat a dried peach, but you aren't going to eat 4 of them. We have a plum tree, and we all of a sudden, for the last couple of weeks in August and first week in September, you have plums just coming out your ears, and so I dry them, and I've got probably 10 quarts of dried plums, and they're great. But you chew on 3 or 4 of them, and you're pretty well satisfied. And that's probably less than 1 plum. So eat a whole lot less. Okay, so fruits really should be seasonal. If we look at it, most of the time, if you didn't go to Safeway, if you had to survive on what you have at home, peach season only lasts a few weeks. pear season, you know, they don't last a long time. And that's when we should be eating a lot. You know, cherries come along in the spring, and you know, if you eat a quart of cherries, you aren't really hungry for anything else. And then you get loose stools for a day or two and clean you out. Good thing to do it in spring.
Well, drying it, doesn't you lose that much in drying it?
I think if you had to preserve them, drying is probably the best way, or freezing. Canning them, you know, you cook them, and it destroys a lot of the good nutrients. Fats and oils. Well, we talked about that a little. We need fats and butter and cream, and we should. I won't try and talk you into having a cow. But that's a full-time job. If you can get raw milk, that's great. Unfortunately, again, in this area, there's several sources of raw milk, and drink the cream. I get raw milk out here. I bring it home and we can buy that much cream on the time. It tastes so good just to drink the cream straight. It's superfood. And they say it's got the Western Pride says it's got this compound W, vitamin W in that, and it's an anti-arthritic vitamin. And I don't know if it's true, but my knees don't hurt anymore because since I've been drinking raw milk. And I can't prove anything from that. But get butter. If you can afford to get organic butter. Butter's good food. And mix it with coconut butter. That's really good for you. Sweeteners, we've talked about that. Fructose. You got to read the labels. Don't eat high fructose corn syrup. That'll accelerate aging, accelerate your risk of diabetes and cancer and heart disease, just about every degenerative disease. And you have to read labels. You just, no matter, you can't, okay, artificial, don't, condiment, salt. Salt is really not a condiment, it's really a food. But, you know, unfortunately, the idea that salt causes high blood pressure, increase your risk of heart disease, all these things, it's based on the idea of what most people consider salt is sodium chloride. Sea salt has about 70 different trace minerals in it, not just sea salt, but like the Great Salt Lake, and there's just a few other salt sources from ancient seabeds. The seabeds now I personally feel are kind of polluted, and it's probably best not to use sea salt unless you get it from Himalayan salt, or there's a salt out of either Salt Lake City or Utah.
Redmond, Utah.
Yeah, they dig it out of the ground. The salt is a good food. One of the great remedies for insomnia is to take about a quarter of a teaspoon of salt an hour or so before you go to bed. And it works for a lot of people. Water. Really, basically water is really all we need to function. We don't need any of this other stuff. We're spoiled though. You know, drinking water is boring. But I've found that what I've done at home, I've gradually evolved in this. I've got a couple containers of water in the refrigerator, and I filter the water first, and then I put a few squirts of magnesium oil in. I put about a half a teaspoon of baking soda and about a half teaspoon of salt in it. It's whole salt, unrefined salt. So, and then I put a wedge of lemon in the container too. And so it's really quite pleasant. And I think you don't really taste the other things we added to it, but it does increase the nutritional content of the water. Now, why do you think I said you don't need to drink 2 quarts of water a day?
Too much.
Well, for some people it is. Now, how much does your wife need the same amount of water you do? You must weigh twice as much as she does. So we're different. That's why we have I showed you the pictures of stomachs. Our needs are different. I had a little aunt that was 95 years old. She weighed about 80 pounds. You think she needed 2 quarts of water a day? But I like to tell people, if you drink too much water, you'll break your hip. Because you have to get up at night and you'll stumble over the rug on the floor and you'll fall down and break your hip. If you're getting up at night to urinate, you're probably drinking too much. What's more important, sleep or water? That's a rhetorical question. There's no answer.
Water.
They're both important.
The chicken or the egg.
But if one interferes, you're sleeping all day then you aren't going to get enough water. So there's no, but your urine should be light yellow. If you urinate and then you look in the toilet bowl and you can't see that anybody's been there, you're probably drinking too much. If you have to get up 2 or 3 times at night or even once at night, uninterrupted sleep is critical to good health. That's what they call REM sleep. But you have to be asleep for a while before you get to the REM sleep level. That's brainwave activity. And if you're waking up every 3 or 4 hours or every 2 or 3 hours, you're not going to get REM sleep. So sometime try not drinking anything in the afternoon. That's a little extreme, and most of you will give up on it. But try, and if you don't get up after not drinking anything from noon on, well then try drinking some at 2 or 3 o'clock. If you can still sleep all night, other things can cause you to have to get up at night, but drinking too much water, for some reason, doctors got this idea, and it's perpetuated in medical schools, you gotta drink 2 quarts of water a day. For an Eskimo, that's almost impossible, because you gotta melt the snow. And for someone that lives on the desert, that's not nearly enough. See? So our water intake is going to be determined by the temperature outside, our level of activity, whatever. If you eat a big piece of watermelon, that'll get you up at night too. 'Cause that's 95% water. So water is important, and it should be good water. It's hard to get good water because most water sources are from the rivers. Now there's some from the wells, a lot from wells, but like the water in, for example, one right here, if it comes from a well, we're surrounded with agriculture and everybody sprays, and so those chemicals are going into the water, and they don't test those water sources for those chemicals. They may check it for bacteria and a few other nitrates and things like that, but they don't check it for pharmaceutical things that come from your neighbor who threw his medicines in the toilet, or the people in Oak Ridge that threw all their medicine in the sewage system. So they don't check for those chemicals. And so it's probably best nowadays to get some sort of a filtered water. I think water like the Mackenzie mist or some of these water sources that come from the mountains nearby, they're better, but they aren't pure anymore. Everything we spray down here drifts up to the east, and so either filter your water or distill your water, but then add some minerals back. If you use distilled water, put some sea salt in it, put some baking soda in it, squirt some magnesium oil in it. Get some of those minerals back in.
What about powdered magnesium instead of magnesium?
That would work.
oil?
I don't care. Powdered magnesium would be just fine. That's 100% magnesium.
Right.
The spray is 16%, so sure.
Scrape it off of your mag wheels.
You could do that too. I'm not sure how well that dissolved in the solution. But you don't need coffee, you don't need milk, you don't need juice, you don't need any of these things to be healthy. Now occasionally you fresh squeeze your orange juice, that's acceptable. But you won't do that very often at $1.50 a pound for oranges, but it's sure a lot different than frozen
How
stuff.
about using magnesium sulfate? Is that acceptable to use in your drinking?
Magnesium sulfate is a good source of magnesium, but it tastes awful, it hurts when you inject it.
Mhm.
And there haven't been the same types of studies been done with magnesium sulfate as there has been with magnesium chloride with regard to its ability to kill bacteria and viruses and fungi and lower blood pressure and things like
I
that.
just know it's just really cheap.
Yeah, Epsom salt.
Yeah, it's really cheap.
Yeah, and so throw it in your bathtub. Sure, it would work. Yeah. Okay. Well, and the other thing I'd like to cover before we run out of time. Go to the second, the back of the second page. Well, I put it in the front of the second page. The myths of vegetarianism. Now, a lot of times you'll hear, and you still hear it, people become vegetarians and they do get healthier. But we're talking about long-term vegetarians. Weston A. Price, probably one of the main nutritional pioneers in this last couple generations, and he wrote this great book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. It's a great book. He traveled all over the world studying indigenous peoples, and the first time he made that trip, he's a dentist by profession. The first time he made that trip, the people he went to look at and photograph and study, they were in the Himalayas and they were in the South Pacific, they were in the Arctic, and they were all over the world. And for the most part, they had essentially no degenerative diseases. Well, 25 years later, he went back to these same peoples, and everybody had degenerative disease. They had crooked teeth, they had club feet, they had tuberculosis, all these things. And the common denominator was they started eating processed foods. And so on his epitaph, he said, be sure when you write on my epitaph that my biggest frustration in life was I didn't find an indigenous culture that was healthy, that were vegetarians. Okay, so this is his website, his followers, westernateprice.org is written down there. And if you go there and look, just search for vegetarian, you'll see all these 15 points explained and the data behind it. So, and then the other thing is, if you turn that page over, we'll see it. We'll go over this real quick. We're kind of out of time. So we have to change our way of thinking, a paradigm shift. Your body can heal itself if you give it the material it needs to get healthy. Chronic diseases are preventable. Nutritional inadequacies are the basis for almost every chronic illness. And what creates a nutritional inadequacy is the stress level internally as well as externally. The greater the pollution in the air, the more we need nutrition. And if when we're out of balance, when there's too much stress versus our nutritional status, and unless we get at the cause of things, that's why, putting braces on kids is great. They come out beautiful, and they put on their retainer and wear it the rest of their life, but no attention given to the nutritional status of their mother and grandmother that caused them to have crooked teeth. Weston Price proved this over and over again. Native indigenous people, beautiful teeth, no cavities. So it isn't how much you brush, or how much you floss, or how many fluoride treatments you have. It's, is your mother well nourished? And when you put braces on a young lady and she comes out beautiful, everybody thinks, well, she's beautiful. And then guess what happens to her children? They all need braces. It's great for business. The orthodontist, no, I won't say anything. And so we've got to deal with the cause. Unless we deal with the causes, we're never going to solve the problem of crooked teeth. Okay, so there's all sorts of stress that increases our need for nutrients, and I've listed them there. And so, what are your questions? Yep.
On the thing of hydrogen peroxide,
Oh, you're going to give us a follow-up report
well,
on your vertigo?
I had the success again this week.
Okay, here's a success story, but this
Yeah.
isn't necessarily nutrition.
I woke up in the morning, my head started spinning. I went out and put peroxide in ears for a while.
Hydrogen peroxide can alleviate vertigo or dizziness in some people. This is what we call anecdotal reporting. Is it really science? Well, someone once said, if it works, it's scientific. That's how you define science.
Can it do anything for ear infection?
Yeah, yeah. Peroxide,
Well,
delivering oxygen.
I had a grandson who had ear infection.
Here, put peroxide in
They wouldn't do it.
Isn't that tragic?
Why do they want to torture it?
It's tragic. Why do you want to torture? It's tragic. And you're going to see that all your life. I had a son who got flu. You're taking your baking soda. I'm not sure. That doesn't taste very good. Anyway, so
Question about, what about people with, I know combat veterans have PTSD, but some people have, in adult life, recognize they had trauma in their childhood, and it's coming up now to be faced and dealt with. And so is there any type of nutritional or any type of thing a person can do to help alleviate some of those kind of symptoms?
Well, sure, I think no matter, it's probably like almost every problem we have. The better our nutritional status is, the less susceptible we are to whatever it is, cancer or PTSD. So, yeah, there's nothing specific. No, it isn't B6 or B10 or whatever. But there's all sorts of things that do work to improve people's response to whatever other form of therapy they're getting.
So, because of better nutrition, you're able to cope better physically,
Yeah,
and you
that's
obviously
right.
mentally don't
And maybe
give
even
up
go,
because-
see, everybody has some PTSD in their life. And when your nutritional status is up here, the stress from PTSD is down here. See, if your nutritional status is good, then, see, this is a principle I think is really critical. Here's as we age, and here's how healthy we are. Now, if we're healthy down here and a major stress comes along, we're gonna succumb to it. But if we're up here, and I don't care, this is life, I guess, and I don't care what the stress is, the higher your level of nutrition, the less likely you're going to succumb to the stress. Like if we took us out here and we all had to jump off a 10-foot ledge. Well, because of our age and our bone density and a whole lot of things, some of us are going to break a leg. Some of us are going to sprain an ankle. Some might die. And my daughter in there probably wouldn't have any trouble at all. She'd run away. She'd probably refuse to jump. No, but the younger, and it's the same with any part of our nutritional status. If we have good levels of coconut oil in our diet, if we're avoiding things that raise our cortisol level that kills our brain cells, then we're going to tolerate the events that lead to PTSD. Did you read the latest study about marijuana? It actually shrinks moms that smoke marijuana, their babies' brain shrinks. Anyway, one of the problems with that is moms that smoke marijuana don't eat well. So it's twofold. It isn't just the, if you took a real well-nourished person and he smoked marijuana, probably wouldn't have nearly the effect as a poorly nourished person. So basically, there's this whole study called Nutrigenomics, and that's where they're studying that the genetic defects that many people have don't show up if someone's well-nourished. Then their nutritional status goes down. Oh, gee, we got a genetic disease like that. But you don't hear about it because they run them out of business. So you got to be smart enough to avoid getting them. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, I heard on the television last week that calories are contagious.
Calories?
They hop from one person to the other.
It must be related to Ebola.
Calories are contagious?
Calories are contagious. Yeah, I see you eating and I get hungry. You know, somebody did a tens of $1,000s study to determine whether or not yawns are contagious. If I see you yawn, am I more likely? Well, if I see you eating, I'm more likely to be hungry, especially if you're eating something I like.
Calories migrate to a magnetic personality.
Anyway, so you just keep learning and experimenting, changing, making little changes, and you'll get better. Anyway, anything else? Okay. Well, keep learning.